Rejection hurts, but erasing goes even deeper. See, rejection says, I saw you and I said no. But being erased says, you weren't even on my radar. And for a lot of men, especially those who identify with like Orbit or the Incel community, that difference is like everything. Because while rejection stings, erasing starves. It empties a person of their sense of worth, their identity, and eventually they may not try again. And that's what this episode is about. Not just loneliness, not just the frustration of not being chosen, but that soul deep ache of never being seen in the first place at all. It's easy to misunderstand incels, right? It's easy to assume that their pain is primarily about sex and dating or access to women. And yes, those are the presenting complaints, the loud and external frustrations for sure. But underneath the anger, beneath the bitterness and the black pill language is this quieter pain that rarely gets named. And it says, I don't feel like I'm real to anyone. Or she didn't just not want me, she didn't even know I was there in the first place. I think that's the difference between rejection and feeling erased. And if we're serious about healing this epidemic of disconnection, well, I think we have to talk about what it does to someone for them to feel unseen for like years on end. So let's get a little honest here. See, most people, they can survive by being rejected, yes. It does sting, but at least you're acknowledged, right? At least there was a moment when, even though it's brief, but there was that moment when someone looked at you and made a choice, at least. But when you feel erased, though, there is no choice. There's no moment. There's no memory. It's just silence, as if you were never there. And that silence is not neutral. That silence is loud. It echoes, and it makes you question whether you ever really existed in the first place at all. And incel forums are full of men who weren't necessarily bullied or mocked or even directly rejected. They were just invisible in school, in social circles, in dating apps, in friendships. They weren't told no, they were told nothing. And while people might say, oh, that's just life, get over it, what they don't understand is that erasure isn't passive. It's an active disconnection. It's repeated. And it's this repeated absence of recognition that eventually leads a person to slowly disassociate from their own sense of humanity. This isn't a defense of toxic behavior, though. It's not even an excuse for misogyny or manipulation or violence. No, it's an invitation to get curious. What happens when someone feels unseen for long enough? What starts as a longing turns to hopelessness. And what starts as this quiet withdrawal eventually turns to rage. And what starts as a need for connection turns into this bitter ideology. Because if no one sees you, eventually you start to wonder even if you exist. And when you start believing that, your actions shift, and your relationship to others shifts as well, and your relationship to yourself deteriorates. So let's bring it down to a human level, shall we? Think of, if you will, think of a time when you walked into a room and no one looked up, or when you said something and no one responded, or when your presence it didn't seem to really register with anyone else around you when you were there. Now imagine that not for an hour, but not even for a day, but for years, this was the setting. A think that's what incels, many of them, are living on the inside on a daily basis with. And while outsiders might just say, well, just put yourself out there more, that advice really ignores a deeper truth. You see, you can't keep offering your presence to a world that never once even affirmed it. And here's where this intersects with integrity and intimacy. Integrity says, who I am on the inside matters. My values matter, right? My truth matters, even if no one sees it. Intimacy says, intimacy. It's that willingness to be seen and to see others in full, vulnerable, living color as they are. And when someone somehow feels erased, both of those pillars collapse. And they stop believing their internal world even matters. They stop risking vulnerability. They stop inviting others to see them because the pain of being ignored, again, is too great. And so they perform, or they withdraw, or they lash out, or they build communities around shared invisibility. Because even resentment feels much better than the emptiness. And here's where the pain becomes a cycle. When someone feels erased, they often start acting in a way that actually ensures that they won't be seen. They become bitter, they become guarded, they become overly critical and defensive. They show up to conversations with a chip on their shoulder, if you will, because that is safer than showing up with hope. But the tragedy is that these behaviors only deepen that sense of feeling erased. People don't want to engage with bitterness. They walk away, right? They mute, they label, they avoid. And so the incel gets erased again, and again, and again. But let's go deeper into that emotional loop, shall we? Because here's the cruel irony in this. The more someone fears being erased, the more they try to protect themselves from it. And those protections, they often become the very thing that guarantees further being erased. So let's take a closer look. A man who feels unseen might stop showing up emotionally. He might convince himself that it's safer not to care. He might make biting jokes, right? Or he might hide behind sarcasm. Or he might write off vulnerable people as merely weak. All of this as a way to say, if I don't show up, I can't be hurt again. But the world doesn't see his fear. The world sees apathy. They see coldness. They see this lack of care. And so it responds accordingly by disengaging. And now he's alone again, but worse. Because now he believes that he deserves it. And this is how self-fulfilling prophecy works, especially in emotional pain. You're scared of being erased. And so you numb out. You withdraw and you wall off. But the moments that you do, you become even harder to reach. And the world confirms what your worst fear was, and that is that you don't matter. And that wasn't the world's message at first, though. It was actually your defense mechanism. It was a way to protect the part of you that still longed to be loved. But you did not know how to be seen without risking that collapse. And this is where the incel narrative finds its strongest grip, because it offers an explanation, at least, a system, a story that actually says, you're not broken, you're actually just cursed, right? And when that story feels like more validating than the silence you're experiencing, people hold on to it like oxygen. But there is another story, a quieter one that's rooted not in blame, and not in bitterness, but in your dignity. And it says, you were always worth seeing, even if and even when no one looked. This new story could say, your pain is not proof that you're a failure. It's proof that you were made to be connected. This new story further goes on to say that you don't need to perform to matter. And you don't need to rage to be remembered. You just need to let yourself be real. But to hear that, you have to actually risk being seen again. Not in your polished zone, not in the curated version of yourself, not in the performative way that you've been accustomed to attempting, but in the vulnerable and shaky and unfinished way that intimacy requires. And this is why the difference between rejection and feeling erased matters so much. Because we don't heal by being chosen. We heal by being seen, even when we aren't chosen. Let me say that again, because that's important. We don't heal by being chosen. We heal by being seen, especially when we aren't chosen. That's what builds internal safety. That's what allows integrity to begin to form again. That's what teaches us how to show up again without self-erasing. So let's talk a little bit about what visibility could be. True visibility isn't about popularity or about getting attention. It's about recognition. It's someone looking at you and saying, I see the person behind the performance. And that kind of seeing doesn't just happen. That kind of seeing is cultivated. It's earned through you being present, through being courageous, through mutual risking. But many men, we were never taught how to risk emotionally, were we? We were told instead how to achieve, right? How to provide, how to suppress, and how to protect. And when that model failed, when the providing went unseen, when the suppression was isolating, and when the protection turned to emotional armor, what was left? Emptiness. Emptiness in a world that does not know how to reach back through the mask. But here's where integrity and intimacy come back in such a robust way. Integrity invites a man to ask, am I living in alignment with what I truly value? Or am I just reacting to what I fear? Intimacy will invite him to ask, if I let someone see what's behind my frustration, what would they find? And the answer to those questions, that can break the cycle. Because most men who feel erased don't actually want attention. They want acknowledgement. They want to be witnessed. They want to know that if they were to disappear tomorrow, someone would notice, someone would care. And that's not entitlement, that's being human. But let's bring this conversation into the cultural space that we now are in, shall we? Because the incel crisis didn't appear out of nowhere. It's a response, a dysfunctional one, yes, but a response nonetheless to this culture that has become increasingly performance-driven and emotionally disengaged and visibly selective in who it considers worthy of love, attention, or even care. In other words, the marketplace mentality, it didn't just affect dating, it infected how we see each other. So we've started measuring human value in likes, in matches, and DMs, and dates, and desirability. And the people who don't get those markets, they're treated as less than real. Not ugly, not awkward, but invisible. And when invisibility becomes normalized, it breeds more than sadness. It breeds a sense of despair. And from despair, people start looking for meaning in the pain, right? That's where the ideology rushes in, right? Incel ideology offers a framework for understanding pain through this fatalistic lens. It says, you're genetically doomed, or attractiveness is one's destiny, or no one will ever want you unless you change your face, or your height, or your entire being. And even though those beliefs are distorted, they feel predictable, at least. And when pain becomes predictable, well, it feels safer than hope. Because hope means risking rejection again. Whereas despair asks nothing from you except that you stop trying. And for someone who's been erased repeatedly, giving up can feel like a relief. But here's the problem though. The incel ideology doesn't heal erasure. It just explains it. And then it anchors it into your identity. You go from I feel unseen to I am unseeable. You go from I haven't been chosen yet to no one will ever choose me. You see that shift? That shift from experience to your identity is where the real damage is happening, because now every interaction will get filtered through that belief. I don't matter, and I never will, right? And you stop looking for connection, and you start looking instead for confirmation. And you find videos that validate your bitterness, and you join communities that feed your fatalism, and you start to believe the lie. It's better to be feared than forgotten, right? But let's pause here. Because if we're going to build a bridge back to these men, we can't just throw facts at them. We can't just shame them into healing. We can't just say, just go to therapy, as if that fixes years of relational erasing. We have to do something even harder. We have to actually see them. Not just tolerate them, not just study them, but truly and really see them. See the pain underneath the language. See the longing that is underneath the rage, perhaps. See the person that's behind the pattern that they're operating under. Because people change in the presence of compassion, not condemnation. But this doesn't mean enabling harmful behavior, though. It means understanding that the emotional ecosystem that created it is where we need to bring that conversation. So when someone grows up emotionally neglected, or socially overlooked, or romantically just dismissed, and if that person is never told that who they are has value outside of performance, it's no wonder that they break. Of course they're going to cling to simplistic answers. And of course they're going to start to believe that connection is for other people. But that doesn't make it okay. But it does make it a bit more understandable, doesn't it? And that's the difference between judgment and healing. Judgment looks for who's to blame, right? Healing, however, looks at who or what's been missing. And what's been missing is, for so many of these men, the mirroring engagement. Someone looking back at them and saying, oh, you are not unlovable. You're not invisible. You are actually here, and I see you. I acknowledge your existence. I acknowledge your presence. That simple act of just being seen without needing to earn it, it can crack through years of feeling erased. Not always, and not immediately per se, but sometimes that moment of visibility is enough just to even plant a seed of integrity, a seed of intimacy, a seed of curiosity. What if I'm not doomed, they might ask, in response to being seen? Because that's the goal here. It's not to save anyone. It's not to argue anyone out of despair. But instead, it's to invite a question. What if I've been wrong about what makes me worthy? What if it's not looks? What if it's not height? What if it's not how many people have wanted me? What if worth was never meant to be earned, but instead carried? And what if the path forward isn't becoming more desirable, but it's becoming more integrated? What if it's more in integrity with your values, or more intimate with your emotions, more present in how you actually connect with the world that is around you? Let me finish by imagining a different possibility, one that is rooted in dignity and not in despair. Because if we can understand that feeling erased is the true wound, then we can begin to understand a possible path out of it, right? Not by promising love to every lonely man, and it's not by telling incels that what they want is to get connected this way, but by offering something even better. It's by offering recognition, humanization perhaps, a safe path back to who they are. Because the healing doesn't begin with someone else choosing you, but it begins instead with you choosing to show up anyway, even when no one else is watching yet. So let's get practical about what that looks like, shall we? Number one, I would say, begin by mirroring yourself. No one's seeing you, but start seeing yourself. Ask yourself, what am I feeling right now beneath this feeling of numbness? Or what parts of me have I been abandoning because others were ignoring them? Or what would I say if I believed someone was really listening right now to me? This is the practice of internal intimacy, you see, building safety inside your own experience. And it's hard, but it's a beginning. Secondly, start showing up in spaces that don't revolve around performance. Places where you're not competing, places where you're not selling yourself, for example, not trying to impress anyone else. And that might be maybe a support group, right? Or a creative community, a local meetup that isn't about dating or status. You see, you need spaces where you can become a person and not a product. Because that's where humanity returns. And when you're seen as you are, the cycle of erasing starts to break. And then thirdly, notice who around you cares. This one is hard, but it's crucial because sometimes those who feel erased start unconsciously also erasing others as well. They start writing people off as shallow because they've spoken. They start dismissing entire groups as unreachable. And they start only seeing others as this source of validation or threat. But this is how pain gets passed on, right? But when you choose to see people, like really see them, you in essence reclaim your own ability to connect. And visibility goes both ways, right? And offering it to others strengthens your capacity to also receive it too. And then fourthly, rebuild your identity around integrity, but not the outcome. Stop making being chosen your definition of success. And instead start asking, did I show up honestly? Was I present with myself? Did I act in alignment with the man that I want to be? Because here's the truth. You can't control who sees you, but you can control whether you are seeable, right? And that begins with integrity. So let's come full circle now. When someone says, I've been rejected my whole life, I think what they're often meaning is that no one ever really saw the real me. Or if they did, they looked away. That's erasure. And it's not fixed by attraction, or it's not fixed by dating apps or self-improvement or tactics. It's only healed by intimacy, by allowing yourself to be seen and seeing others in return. And that journey, it's scary, but it's also important because it means you're still open, you're still breathing, you're still willing to believe that connection is possible. So to those listening who feel erased, you're not crazy, and you're not broken. You're not too far gone. You've been hurting in a way that most people don't really talk about, and that pain deserves attention, not shame. But the invitation isn't to wait till someone validates you. It's to begin validating yourself, to begin rebuilding your identity around presence instead of performance, to begin showing up without having to choose to justify your existence in the first place. You were always worthy, even in the silence, even in the shadows, even when no one was looking your way. You were always worthwhile, and you still are. If you're outside the Incel community and you've never felt this kind of erasure, consider this. Consider this as an invitation to see deeper, to look at the quiet kid, or the man who never interrupts, the one who seems checked out, perhaps. And then ask yourself, am I treating this person as real, or am I reinforcing the story that he doesn't exist? You see, visibility isn't charity, it's a responsibility, I believe. Because when we truly see each other, when we see each other with compassion, with curiosity, and with courage, we don't just prevent harm, we begin to create healing. This episode I wasn't wanting to make you agree. It wasn't to try and make you care, because until we understand the real fear, this driving incel pain, and it's not rejection but erasing, I think we'll continue to misdiagnose the wound, and we'll miss the opportunity to heal it. But if we get this right, if we start seeing what's been overlooked, and if we start building something better, it's possible to mend that bridge. A culture that doesn't just celebrate the visible, but cherishes also the vulnerable, that doesn't just reward performance, but honors presence. This is a beautiful transformation. And that just might be the bridge back to us.